Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today, we will be reviewing the GTX 970 and seeing how it holds up in some more modern day titles. I came across this GPU in a place you might not typically expect to find one, Goodwill. This actually came in a bin of about 4 different GPUs in which I only paid about $50 for, and considering the used market for 970s can be anywhere from about $50 to $70 on eBay, this was basically a steal. This specific GPU is a Gigabyte WindForce 3XOC that is running at 1114 MHz at the base and will boost up to 1253. It is also running 4 GB of GDDR5 VRAM. When the card is apparently in OC mode, it gets a slight boost to its clocks, but nothing that seems too substantial, nor do I know how to activate that. Maybe it's automatic. This GPU caps out around 170 watts of power under full load, which is higher than some lower end modern cards, but also not too bad either, actually about on par with a 3060. For some more in-depth specifications, it's running with 1664 unified shading units and runs on a 256-bit bus. Wild how some new cards have less than that nowadays, huh? One really wild thing about this card, however, is all of its video outputs. 2 dueling DVI ports, HDMI, 3 freaking display ports. Whoever has a desperate need to run 6 displays at once, this thing has got you covered. For our test bench, I pulled out my old computer to test it in. We're running with a Ryzen 5 3600 with 32GB of 3200 MHz RAM, and running on a somewhat cheap ASRock B450 motherboard, but what can you do? It was a pre-build after all. It gave video out without any issue, which is always nice. This 9-year-old GPU is also still getting current gaming driver updates, which is a very nice bonus. Although keep in mind that it may not be very long before they get potentially discontinued. I will not also be attempting to manually overclock this card for this video, and I don't even know if it'd be worth it in such a choked out case that looks like this. But may look into it for the future. Let's see how much gaming performance we can get for just $50 in the benchmarks. We'll be throwing it up against a variety of modern titles, and just like the last video, this is all captured in an Elgato HD 60 Plus. Let's get into it. Having recently picked up 3D Mark, I had figured it'd be good to show the relative performance of the card in synthetic benchmarks. The 1080p FireMark benchmark showed really good results across the board, but the 1440p TimeSpy was very much not so. If we want to get the best we can out of this card, it looks like we're sticking to 1080p gaming. Although, I have no doubt that some older games could run just fine in 1440p if you really wanted to. Starting off here with a pretty light yet modern title, Battlebit Remastered running at 1080p Ultra was handled beautifully, running a 64 versus 64 match at a 152 FPS average, with the point lows being 83 and 8. The 8 is mostly due to a hitch when loading in the scoreboard, and it's nothing to really worry about. This game is not graphically intensive at all, due to being super pixelated and blocky, but it's nice to know that we can still play something with lots of action and huge player count lobbies without much issue. Overall, very playable with a great mixture of both visuals and frame rate. For those looking for a more grand scale indie title, No Man's Sky is running very admirably here. With the standard settings at a full 1080p resolution, we're hitting a very solid 109 FPS average with the lows of 81 and 7. Just like with Battlebit, a rogue stutter is what tanked our 0.1 lows here, and otherwise I was able to explore this planet and kill off the local wildlife without much of an issue. It's pretty great to see how far this game has gone since its initial launch, and I would say is definitely worth a look at if you've passed it up before. For a pretty graphically intensive looking game that still has a lot of work to be done, SCP-5K was still performing rather well for being in its alpha stages. Running at a 1080p medium preset, we're hitting just below the 90 FPS mark here, although we frequently hit a bit of slowdown every now and then with our lows taking down towards 35 and 10. Not as great as some other titles, but more updates could also bring more optimizations. We also have AMD's FSR available to use here, both version 1 and 2, though we still have some room to tweak the settings should you want a higher frame rate. Although I find FSR here to be not quite as effective as in other games, but is still overall an enjoyable experience, and you should have a good time playing on this card. A newer AAA release that is surprisingly well optimized here, Armored Core 6 ran pretty well with stable frame rates overall. Our average here at 1080p low settings is 75, which can, on occasion, dip down to the mid-50s depending on what you're looking at. With point lows at 52 and 38, this game is running pretty good, although I did have a really bad stutter when loading in the area boss, but that was probably more due to being on an external SSD. Overall, very playable, and you should have a great time. It should be no surprise that this card still holds up very well in esports titles. In CSGO 2, we're maintaining a 149 for the average, and a great 81 and 56 for the lows at a 1080p resolution and low settings, with a tiny bit of anti-aliasing mixed in. If you like, there is still FSR available, but I found these settings to be a good mix of visuals and a competitive frame rate. Overall, it's pretty amazing that this little card can still handle it so well, especially after the graphical updates. This one is quite a surprising result actually. Black Mesa is a modern remake of Half-Life, bringing the original to a very beautiful recreation, which is in turn much more intensive, or so I thought. At 1080p medium, we're standing at a blazingly fast 161 FPS average, while in one of the most intensive areas of the game, the Zen homeworld. While also really great lows of 89 and 36, you should have no trouble enjoying this game even at a higher refresh rate. Beautiful and yet pretty well optimized. Would highly recommend you check out the game, especially if you're a fan of the original. It should be no surprise that Minecraft is running very well on our 970, so I decided to push it to its limits here with some shaders. Using Iris and Sodium, with a BSL shader pack with the medium preset selected, and fast textures, we're averaging a pretty solid 60 to 70 FPS experience, with some dips down into the 50s during normal gameplay. Of course, you have that usual Minecraft stutter pretty much invalidating our point lows here. Swapping down to the low preset, however, showed us boosting up to around the 80 to 90 FPS mark, with those previous dips down to the 60s now. Both are a very good experience, especially for something looking very nice. Unfortunately, I had to use a previous version of Iris here since for some reason the newest one crashes Minecraft when using Riva Tuner, the software I use for these benchmarks. I would also assume one could get decently similar performance out of using Optifine as well, but I did not test it. Fortnite, which is really the only other competitive game I could stand playing, ran pretty nicely overall. We're at 1080p low with medium textures and a far view distance, and overall we managed a very nice 130 FPS average while playing on the new season. After we got through a couple stutters that always happen when you jump into new maps, of course. Lows of 58 and 8, it was still more than a playable experience, and you should have a good time with it, no matter if it's the Battle Royale or jamming out to Weezer in the Jam Festival. Capcom's remasters of the Resident Evil franchise has shown to bring these older cards to their knees without some kind of assistance. Once again at 1080p, we're hitting a 75 FPS average here with mostly low settings and FSR set to balance. That's actually pretty good considering that this card is over 10 years old at this point and this is a 2023 game. FSR is definitely pulling its weight here, but it's nice to see that we still have options like that to keep cards like these relevant in the modern day. Point lows of 52 and 41, this is a very stable experience, which is actually a little bit surprising, all things considered. Cyberpunk, despite its many updates and optimizations, will still bring a card like this down to its knees. Just to reach a sub 60 FPS experience, we had to go all the way down to the lowest settings and switch FSR to balanced mode. Even then, most of the time it was in the low 50s when anything slightly intensive happened, although the lows of 41 and 25 are not as bad as I would have thought. Ultra Performance will give us a bit more of a consistent frame rate here, around the 60 FPS mark, but at the cost of Vaseline smear and very apparent ghosting everywhere. It's very much just a matter of picking your poison here. The pure, unadulterated violence and gore of Doom Eternal can definitely give the GTX 970 a run for its money as well. Standing firm at 1080p low, our averages seems to be up to about 110 here, but expected to drop down to the 80s for mildly intensive fight scenes. Although as the point loads of 65 and 58 show, it was a completely smooth time during gameplay, minus some minor hiccups here or there. Playing through the opening level show this little card still has quite a bit of life left to give, and should help you push through the horde of demons rather easily. And for the most recent game on our list is the ever-popular Palworld that released only a short time ago. Being in early access here, it's still got a lot of room for improvement, and the frame rate is definitely reflective of that. At 1080p low with some TA enabled, we're hovering around the 68 FPS mark here on average, although there was quite a bit of stuttering every now and then, and even during one point when attacking a syndicate base, we dropped heavily into the 30s and 20s. Maybe because my own home base was in view. It blasted our lows down to 23 and 7 when that happened, but otherwise it was mostly an alright experience. I tested it with VSync on and off, and for some reason having it on caused our stutters to be much worse, so leave it off with this game. Palworld is playable, but make sure to keep your expectations in check. It's an early access game after all. Overall, this little GTX 970 is still putting up a pretty good fight here. Even if it's at low settings, we never had to fully sacrifice our original 1080p resolution, even if a couple of these we had to use FSR, which you might consider cheating, I really don't. If you're looking for a good entry-level graphics card here, picking one of these up for $50 is pretty worth it in all honesty. It can still fare surprisingly well in today's titles and current esports as well. It may not have DLSS, but thankfully, software like AMD's FSR can help extend the life of the GPU just a little bit longer as you save up for a potential upgrade. I would like to thank you all for watching. I've got several more GPUs to test out in the upcoming videos, so if you're interested in seeing how those stack up to some games, be sure to hit subscribe and I will see you all next time.